Hey, good morning, all. Thursday, July 1st. Finally, July, Dan. Finally, we have made it to
Finally.
the great month of July. And Dan, this is a day that a lot of people look forward to. July 1st. I mean, they mark it on their calendars. They say to themselves, that's coming on Thursday in 2021. They know the day. That's partially because they're from Somalia, and this is Somalia Independence Day. In the United States, we celebrate that on July 4th, but in Somalia, they found their independence on July 1st, so it's a big Independence Day. The other reason people mark this day is because it's producer Dan Deitrich's birthday, so happy birthday to you, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tip of the hat.
To me and the Somalians.
How are you going to spend this birthday of yours?
We're going to get up to the lake and hopefully be in the water a lot because it's real hot. And kayak a little bit.
What year of July on July 1st were you?
83.
83.
So, yeah.
Is that a day that when you go back and look up July 1st, 1983, other important things happen on that day? Do you happen to know?
I don't know. I've never dug that deep.
Really? You've never Googled your birthday? Oh, friends, family, neighbors,
maybe
country,
someone in the comments could come up with some fun facts for me
during the hour-long podcast when the host is rambling on. You could find your way to a fun fact about 1983 and July 1st. It's probably one of those days that you're like, oh no, I remember. I just didn't know that happened on the day I was born because I was busy that day.
Yeah, I was
being born. Yeah, I mean, to mark our age differences, I totally remember July 1st, 1983. It was the summer before my senior year in high school. My birthday's coming in just 4 days on the 5th of July. So I was gearing up and, in the heart of, a junior in high school, probably driving around doing reckless summer things that you got to do back in the 1980s. But happy birthday to you, and may you be. Do you know this little blessing? I don't know if it's Irish or Scottish, or otherwise, but it's may you be born in a casket made of 100-year-old tree that was planted today.
Wow, I like that.
Isn't that poetic? Yeah, like you're gonna get to live another 100 years because the casket.
That sounds like a bit much, but.
Seems a little thick, right?
No.
Yeah. Like, really? Do I want to be 140? I don't know how long ago that was. How long ago was 1983? Is that
38 years? Yeah.
38 years. 38 years. Wow. Did you ever think you'd live to be 38?
When I was a kid, I was like 38 is ancient. So I.
Totally. Are you your parents older than your parents when you were born?
Oh yeah.
Well past that.
That's weird. Yeah.
My parents were older when I was born, so it was like I was in my 40s before I hit the age of like, oh, this is when my parents, became parents, and then everything, because your frame of reference for your own life sort of gets marked by that.
Yeah, and growing up, you think that adults have it all together, and then you get to adult age, and you're like, boy, we're running the world. Is this okay?
Right, and the adults that didn't seem like they had it together, they were the fun ones. They were the ones that kind of liked being around. And then you kind of realize later, no, they weren't the fun ones. They were having a hard time. And those other people didn't have it together. And this is all a disaster. But happy birthday to you, Dan. And to everybody else celebrating their birthdays on July 1st, whether that's, a nation's birthday. I think we should call those anniversaries more than birthdays, but I won't be bickering about that on your birthday today. And so if somebody else has a birthday today and you're listening along, whatever day you're listening, maybe you listen to this a day after Mike Stavlin, and your birthday is on July 2nd. Happy birthday to whatever. I mean, you sort of did the least to accomplish that day of celebration. You
didn't do anything, but hey.
You were just all benefit. You're a real beneficiary. So thanks to your mom too for all the work she put in.
Yeah.
And
Doug, I noticed that new T-shirt, "We the People Ride" T-shirt.
Yeah, We the People Ride shirt. They now exist in the world, and if you would like one, Dan, well, I'll send you one just for your birthday without a sizable contribution. But if other people would like a We the People Ride T-shirt and they want to go with us down to the border and ride across the country for a day, for an hour, for a mile, for 3,000 miles, whatever it is you want to do, we'd love to have you come along, make a little donation, and indicate that it's for, you can go over to votecommongood.com and do that, or wethepeopleride.org, make a contribution, and we will send you one of these very fine, fancy t-shirts. And speaking of people going to the border, the reason we're going to the border is to bear witness. Other people go to the border for all kinds of other reasons. And I get it, right? People go to the border to politicians and people working on issues of immigration, border practices. They go for a lot of different reasons. We're going to be bearing witness to the experience of people who live along the border, who do work and care for people crossing the border, and people who are impacted by the border wall and by the border policies where there's not a wall, like all of Texas, where there's not a wall. So we'd love for you to join us. Let's not let just the politicians and former politicians and interlopers use the border. Join us yourself. Again, we're starting September 10th, doing this through November 14th, where we end up in Florida. So we're along the U.S.-Mexico border until the 18th of October. So anywhere between September 10th and the 18th of October, if you want to come and join us along that border wall, we'll start in San Diego, make our way along the U.S.-Mexico border all the way down to Brownsville, Texas. So we'd love to have you join us. And Donald Trump and the governor of Texas went down to the border to somehow yell and claim and insinuate that Joe Biden is not doing enough to keep America safe. Guy's been president for 135 days. Trump did nothing to make us more safe, but did a lot to make us all more miserable, especially around the work of the border. I mean, there's just, you can make all your arguments about why you support Donald Trump, the good things you think he did. This border nonsense of his was a disaster from the start. It remains a disaster today, and it's going to be a generation to fix it. They were just wrong on everything. And he went and stood by this little piece in the picture. If you're looking on the video feed, you can see a little picture from the headline of the Washington Post. It's this portion of the wall that Trump says that he built in Texas, which is just ridiculous. There's 800 miles of border between the United States and Mexico that follows the Rio Grande River. That's the demarcation. The legal international border is the Rio Grande and how it rolls. There's a few miles of border wall in little cities and then in a couple little random spots. And those border walls, they just end. Like people just walk around the side of it. It's like a cubicle. It's like a partition. It's not
a mild inconvenience at best.
Yes, it's kabuki theater. It's and look, our nation loves kabuki theater stuff around safety and immigration and TSA and protection at the airport. I mean, if you ever have to empty out your water bottle or can't carry toothpaste in a container larger than 4 ounces, but you could carry 14 toothpastes that are 2 ounces. Tell me how this makes any sense, right? It's simply the size of the container, all that stuff. And I'm just irritated because I flew yesterday, and just dealing with it again is just it's such utter and complete madness that we do around, people getting on airplanes and so on. Talk about fighting the last war of 2 decades ago. Well, that's what the wall is all about. It doesn't make any sense. It interrupts, it harms. So Donald Trump went down there with the governor of Texas to try to,
put on a show,
tell people that he really did a great job. And it's Joe Biden that's actually making us unsafe. People don't feel unsafe because of our border practices unless you're trying to cross the border. The people who are unsafe are people that are in harm's way, the people that are struggling, the people that are doing all they can to come to the country that would take your poor and your broken who long to breathe free. Those are the people suffering. The
huddled masses.
It is something else. Huddled masses that now we just say, let's separate you from your families. Hey, and by the way, we talked about this a little bit on Monday in the podcast when I did that interview, which I still can't stop thinking about. If you haven't listened to Monday's conversation with 2 of the people that were part of the fast for Vigil, and we talked to Laura, and she's an incredible story. Can't stop thinking about it. But just how family separation is something we still do in this country every time we deport parents of kids, that somehow we think the world is made better by taking the one person from the family who overstayed a visa or crossed without legal documents, and now we separate them from their
Right.
family for the rest of their life, because there's no
Yeah.
way to remedy this. It's just utter madness. It's not
And
only on the back. Donald Trump made it worse, yes, but every politician who's been at the federal level for the last 40 years has a finger of responsibility in this thing.
Right. Yeah, and it's just odd that the party of family values champions this hard-lined, well, you broke the law, you reap the consequences. Doesn't matter if it ripped your family apart for the rest of your life for, a minor infraction.
Yeah.
It's a system we made up and we can change. Like, we don't have to.
Yes. Yeah. We don't even have the laws that exist aren't even legitimately framed laws. They're actually policies. They're not law. I know this becomes something that people don't know how to talk about, but when someone crosses a border without documentation, whether they do it at a port of entry or they do it somewhere else, they're not technically breaking the law. They're actually violating border policy, which is slightly different. When you talk about breaking the law, that's what the chief operation officer of the Trump organization did. Broke the law. So that's why he was indicted today to be arrested. That's what Paul Manafort did. That's what Michael Flynn did. That's what Michael, what's his lawyer's name? Michael Cohen did. That's what George Papadopoulos did. That's what Roger Stone did. That's what all the people who've been indicted at a federal and state levels have done. That's breaking the law. Crossing a border is violating a border policy. So what they say then is, hey, you can't stay here because you didn't do it right, so you have to go back. That's why we don't put people who cross our border without documentation in jail in the United States. If they cross the border without documentation and then steal a candy bar from the 7-Eleven, that is a crime for which they could be punished by the statutes of the law and have a criminal penalty for stealing. Crossing the border, you don't get that. So this idea that you're going to punish people for not following the law, technically and legally and importantly, it's not violating the law. That's why there's a return to your country of origin practice with Border Patrol. What we need to do is put in place practices and policies and laws that allow people to cross the border and stay here and not have to be kicked out when they get caught for being here. It's I guess it's not quite akin to sneaking into a movie, because I don't know, they might get you on trespassing charges or something if you sneak into a movie, but it's more like that than it is stealing the film. It's like being on it's less than trespassing, because that's actually even a law. So there's a lot going on. Well, the governor of Texas said, we can't protect our borders and we can't do it, so we need all the other governors to help us. So then the governor of South Dakota decided that she was going to take money from a billionaire in Tennessee to fund the National Guard from South Dakota to go down and help Greg Abbott figure out how to protect the border. None of these people are calling for comprehensive border change. What they're saying is we need to send the National Guard from South Dakota, paid for by a billionaire in Tennessee, as private mercenaries. I mean, it is talk about, which likely is, by the way, if you haven't followed this news story, that's likely a violation of the law to fund a state National Guard with private funds from a funder from somewhere else with the explicit direction that this money's now going to be used to send them to protect our border in Texas, of all the places. I mean, I thought Texas could handle it itself.
Well,
and by the way, you come with us, you get along the border, you're going to find out all of this stuff should be worked out, negotiated out, as it has been for hundreds of years. This stuff is just unbelievable nonsense. But in the last week, Vice President Harris, Donald Trump, Greg Abbott, now, a big to-do from the people in South Dakota, and some billionaire from Tennessee using his money to send his own private militia via the South Dakota National Guard. It just is so ridiculous. Why don't you spend the $1 million on supporting a comprehensive immigration plan and border policy plan, and then maybe we would see the kind of outcome that we want in this country.
Right.
And by the way,
Texas does need some help. Maybe we should send some money so they can keep their air conditioners on and fix their power grid.
Yeah. I mean, you can't protect your borders, so you're not really part of our country, according to Donald Trump, and you can't keep your power on because, is Texas a failed state? Of course not. This is what they're talking about. This is what they're trying to gin up, right? Is that somehow they're these freedom fighters protecting, which is the reason that you want to be out of power. Now, why Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, wants to act like he's incompetent, I don't understand. Normally, you wait till you get out of power and then you say that the other guy's incompetent. You don't start yelling, this isn't working, our governor can't handle it, when you're the governor.
Right.
But this is why we want to go down there as well, right? Because, look, everyone save a few listening to this hasn't been to the border. Most of us and everywhere else in the country, we haven't been to this or the U.S.-Mexico border unless we were just crossing in, for a tour group or something. But to really see what's happening, you really catch a glimpse. So we're going to be doing that in September, and we're going to raise our voices. Hey, and I'll also say this. What was I going to say? Because now I see that Vince just popped up a TV commercial, the first TV commercial in the 1941 era. Now I just can't help but see. I got to turn the comments off. I should just.
Well, I'm loving this from Vince. Apparently I share a birthday with Princess Diana, Carl Lewis, Dan Aykroyd, David Duke, great,
Wow.
Deborah Harry, and Pamela Anderson. So
Jamie Farr too. Yeah. Hey, how about that? That's a group. What's your sign, man? What are you on July 1st? What's your zodiac sign?
Cancer.
Maybe. Yeah, me too.
Which isn't much fun to say. It's like, could we replace that with a different word at this point?
Yeah. Or? Could we repeal and replace? And then when you say like, well, don't use that word, use the little creature or whatever. Well, it's a crab.
So kind of fits.
Yeah, I'm a crab as well. My daughter just read something to me from the personality side of the zodiac, and these are people who likely, and then it's one of these sort of shockingly accurate, and it wasn't just fortune cookie accurate. No, it felt like there's something in there, because I also am a Cancer, don't have, but am a Cancer on the zodiac sign. But I don't know what anybody else is. I don't even know my wife's zodiac sign. She's born May 8th. I don't, maybe Pisces. Maybe.
Are they all different diseases, or how does it work?
They're all different scourges on humankind. No, turns out just the Cancer people.
Just Cancer.
Just Cancer is the one that we're into. All right, hey, so much happening in the news, in addition to what's happening on our border, which is sort of a perennial kind of an issue. Today's not a great day for Harold Weisselberg, as I mentioned. He's the CEO and the person behind all the organization of the Trump clan, and he was indicted by state officials today. Appeared at the courthouse something at 6:30 this morning Eastern time, and at 2:00 Eastern time today, they're going to publicly open up this indictment and say what their charges are, not only against Harold Weisselberg, but against the Trump organization. Here's the thing, Dan, I don't understand. Maybe you know it and can explain it. Organizations and companies and businesses sometimes get treated like a person. Famous in the voting world, right? That you can't limit corporate contributions because corporations are people too. Mitt Romney is famous for having tried to argue that point. That they are collectives of people, but apparently an organization can be criminally indicted, which is what's happening today. The Trump organization. I don't know how that impacts the people who are the shareholders or are the principals of the company, but the company itself could be punished criminally, meaning it could have removed from its available options the right to exist as a company in the United States. Loans can be called back from banks. It can be a really serious thing, which could ultimately bankrupt Trump and his kids and others, unless they've hidden away their money in tax-free shelters in violation or in agreement with the law someplace. So there's a lot going on. It feels like to me that this is the start of something, not the end of something. This is the first indictment, and that this is going to become something that we're going to see what this works that's been going on by the state attorney general and by the prosecutor in the federal prosecutor in the state of New York is going to be doing about the Trump administration or the Trump's business overall actions and activities over these last few years, at least. I mean, if they just keep digging back, it has been referred to by a number of people, including me, that it operates more like a criminal organization than it does just your standard organized business. And it just uses litigation and criminal kinds of skirting of the law to operate. And that guy who ran that thing was the person who was the chief law enforcement officer of this country, and said that he was all for law enforcement until he put together an insurrection that literally beat on police officers from multiple police agencies on January 6th. It just is
law and order.
Just the worst possible person again to have ever been president. And so this Donald Trump, he's back out on the road, but in Alabama, he was being brought in for an event that was supposed to celebrate some things going on, in Alabama. It was going to be just a civic engagement on July 3rd. And they decided that they had to cancel Donald Trump. The Republican back group had to say he can't come because he started coordinating with other Republicans. And we listened to what he said last Saturday. And it's not possible for him not to turn this into a partisan screed. So here the people planning this great activity in Mobile, Alabama, canceled him because he was going to violate their 501c3 status, which, by the way, Donald Trump does not, he's not bothered by violating the laws of nonprofits. In fact, his nonprofit that he ran was shut down, and he and his children are barred from ever being members of the board of any nonprofit again. Like, these people are so corrupt, they can't even lead a nonprofit. That's how corrupt they are. And now their for-profit business is under scrutiny. I mean, it is just unbelievable.
Well, kind of fun.
So he's being canceled.
Me and Donald Trump apparently share a similarity. We are both barred from Alabama. I was kicked out of Alabama, not really technically, but by a family member after I posted a thing on Facebook about how the Confederate flag is racist. He was like, well, you are no longer welcome in the state of Alabama. And, and they've held to it. So
yeah. You and DJ
me and Donald
need
Trump
to say, like, Alabama, you can't stop us. Alabama, of all the states that I've had the privilege of being in, all except one, Alaska, I just have no connection to Alabama. I've been there. I was at a great, there's a great organization there. But I just feel like Alabama is something I don't know. I got to bone up my Alabama. But who am I going to go to Alabama with? Not you.
Not me.
Not Trump. I mean,
not welcome.
People just not welcome in Alabama. But I find this actually quite impressive that Donald Trump has been asked to not appear, and then he's going to do an event on Saturday as well in Sarasota, Florida, which is near Seaside, Florida, where, of course, this tragic happening of the building collapsing. And the governor of Florida has asked Donald Trump not to come, and he's still coming. Like,
really?
He's disinvited from Alabama. The governor, who's his protege, has said, this really isn't a good time, Don. Can you not come right now? No, he's still going. Well, at least as of now, he's still going, because, I mean, to get canceled from Florida and Alabama, that would just be too much. I mean, when the country cancels you in your job and fires you, and then, you can't go to Alabama or Florida. Oh, boy, Donald.
That's really, a tough deal.
Really up to some. The guy continues to stay in the news, though, man. I'm telling you, it's just simply incredible how he stays in the news. But he's not the president anymore, and that's because on November 3rd, this country overwhelmingly picked Joe Biden to be the president. And there's now more details on who the people were that did that picking. Pew is one of the organizations that does a lot of paying attention to how people voted, and they do their own polling, and they have their own polling process. And they've now come out with some data and some information about how voting went and who voted for whom and how voting took place. Now, I think Pew does a great job on a lot. I don't think Pew does a great job on their religious voter details. It's just a little side note inside the world of the subset of religion, the subset of politics, and the subset of that cares about how polling goes. Many of us in this world feel that Pew has a particular style and vibe and approach to religion, especially self-identified religious movements, that causes it to be less than accurate compared to some of the others. So setting that aside, so if you see news stories out that, like Pew says that evangelicals voted more for Trump, that's a Pew problem. And that has to do with how the size of the group that they're interpreting. So they have a smaller cluster now than in 2016. And they say that a larger percentage of a smaller number, and almost no one else does it this way. So setting that aside, a couple of the things that have come out in this world that I think are rather interesting is this little subset. And I think we have it for the screen for those of you who are watching. But in the Pew voting tally that's now being released, they're saying that Biden made really great gains with men, while Trump improved among women, narrowing the gender gap. So what a lot of us have assumed is that women were going to turn against Trump, and that men, that old crazy uncle of yours, that white men, again, are the problem. And that story has been told over and over and over. As it turns out, that's not what the details tell us about the national numbers. Now, here's the other problem. What this polling is doing is national polling, and it kind of doesn't matter. So what happens in Alabama or what happens in Mississippi or what happens in New York or California has less impact than what happens in some of the state because of the Electoral College. But overall in the country, white men moved away from Trump. In fact, the only group to sort of flip in its overall percentage, and women trended toward Trump. It's just, Dan, it's just mind-blowing to me. Here's how it reads. The gender gap in the 2020 election was narrower than it was in 2016, both because of gains that Biden made among men and because gains Trump made among women. In 2020, men were almost evenly divided between Trump and Biden, unlike in 2016 when Trump won them by 11 points. Trump won a slightly larger number of the women's vote in 2020 than in 2016, 44% compared to 39%, while Biden's share among women was nearly identical to Clinton's at 55% or 54%.
Yeah, I don't understand how you could sit through 4 years of Trump and have not voted for him as a woman, and then after 4 years be like, nope, I think this is my guy. It's beyond me. It is, but
and I'm not a woman. I don't know. I guess I can't speak to it personally, but sort of culturally, like what now? How is this the case? But men moving away from Trump by 11 points, or by nearly 11 points, that is fantastic. I mean, it almost evened up. In fact, in some polling, Pew's a little bit off on this. Again, Pew's a little quirky. It had a plurality of 50% plus of white men voting for Biden away from Trump. That it was the only group that went from being less than 50% to over 50%. Pew gets really close to that number, but not quite up to the plurality. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. So all of you that feel unhopeful about white men in this country, there are a lot of reasons that you should. Them not voting for Donald Trump to the same numbers that they did in 2016, that's hopefully an indicator. Hopefully that's a sign. Hopefully that's something that really is going to make a big difference going forward. And may they never return to that sort of nonsense. Even though, what you see in the insurrection, which we'll talk about in a minute, and all that is just overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white. So it can create an impression. But these numbers, if they should be trusted, would tell you that no, men have moved, but so did women, and so did Hispanic voters move toward Trump. Now, not a plurality, but a noticeable shift. Yeah, It's so the world is not as simple as we think that it is when it comes to voting and comes to the choices that people are making. And now, do people tell the truth to pollsters? This is one of the big questions. The best way on voting is to not do all the slicing and dicing and just go for your numbers. And we know that what people told pollsters going into 2016, going into 2018, and going into 2020 about how they were going to vote, they did their magic with their statistics and said, therefore, this is going to be the outcome. Biden is going to win huge, Clinton's going to win huge. Then it didn't turn out that way. So the big question was, well, is the model wrong? Are the statistics being utilized in ways that are not accurate? Or are people not telling the truth to pollsters? And most people have concluded it's the third, that people don't tell the truth to pollsters. So is that true in after polling as well? And that's one of the things that we just don't know. So as good as polling can be, as accurate as it can be, the only thing that really matters is how people behave on that day when the vote is cast.
Yep.
And so never trust any of the other stuff that you're hearing about it. Just finish the work and get to the poll and do the thing that you have to do.
Yeah, Carlene Carr in the comments says, I don't get how women voted for him, let alone in higher numbers in 2016. Would these women want Trump sitting at their dinner table? I think that's a fairly decent litmus test. Would you want this guy over for dinner?
Yeah, that was that old thing with, was it Bush, that the idea was like, who would you rather have a beer with?
Right,
George
yeah.
Bush or John Kerry or Al Gore or something like that. And that kind of folksy friendly. Yeah, but there's a lot of people who just give up on politics and they're like, I want a hard nosed person that's on my
tough
side.
guy,
Yeah. Like, I don't know, people are like, well, I wouldn't want my plumber over for dinner either, but when I need to get my plumbing fixed, I know who to call. That kind of attitude about it, right? And I think this has a lot to do with how one views politicians and how they view the presidency, as well as other things. But look, I think the thing that should matter to a lot of us who care about our civic engagement and care about our political world is that the messaging and the convincing arguments that work for some of us, they don't work for everyone. And gender or religion or race, that's not enough. It's not enough to say, if your chromosomal pattern is X, if your cultural experience has been this way, not X, I shouldn't have said that. If your chromosomal pattern is this and your cultural experience is this, then we just know then this is what you're going to do. Man, it's not that way. In fact, these numbers here with Pew are a little different. I've seen some other polling that says that the majority of women voted for Republicans across the board, and that women haven't voted for Democrats across the board. It's like Kennedy or something. So there's a lot that goes into how people end up casting votes and why they do. And I think for all of us who shake our heads as we do here, on a regular basis, and say to ourselves, what are people thinking? Well, that's the thing you actually have to go find out. What are they thinking? Because they are thinking something, right? I mean, it's easy to write people off and say, well, I know that I'm operating out of something that makes sense to me, but these people can't possibly be because X, Y, and Z. And I think we have to be very careful about that. I think we
for
have to
sure. And I think Marjorie Keenan says, in my experience, the women I know that liked Trump thought he was doing God's work. And I think this gets to the heart of an issue we've talked a lot about around here, is this Christian nationalism, like the United States and Christianity are one and the same. And Jesus needs this tough guy to defeat the evil armies of the liberals,
Yeah, I saw one of those videos going around the other day, which I think probably gave this pastor more attention than he ever got, because people are pointing out the danger of what he's saying. But he's basically running this story that there's tunnels under the Capitol, and people are shuffling children, and there are pedophiles all through the government, and you have to stand out against. Like, there's enough people in that little group, and then enough people who in another little group, and it all sort of comes together. And what the Trump world did pretty well is they stitched together a set of baskets, and there was one basket that were people you would call culturally deplorable, and they pride themselves in that moniker. And yeah, it's, I don't, I think Marjorie's right that there are people who thought Trump was doing God's work. And some of that, for those of us in the religion world, where I find myself, that's because what people think God does is not very great.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you could make the argument, Trump's not doing what God did. Of course not, because Trump's not doing the God thing. Or you could say maybe your view of God is that God does that kind of stuff.
Right.
That God's also
Dominion
cruel and mean.
And yeah,
Mhm.
acquiring territory for God's people. And yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we've been working really hard on this anti-Christian nationalism curriculum that we're putting out, and doing some work with Christians Against Christian Nationalism. By the way, if things go right, listen to your local NPR station this Sunday.
Oh, really?
Hint. Perhaps, on, the 4th of July, when you're in the car and you're with the family, you're like, let's be quiet for a minute and turn on All Things Considered. That's what you want to do. But we're putting out this curriculum to try to help leaders and people and individuals be able to have these conversations, because it's never 80% of a church that's into this Christian nationalism stuff or some of the rest of this. It's not everybody.
Right.
It's not even every pastor. It's a small percentage. But as we all know, the most powerful seed of all the seeds is the mustard seed. And it's the smallest, yet when it blooms, all the birds can feed off of its leaves. So small little things, little fractions, little 10% the remnant makes a huge difference. And that's where the work is happening, actually, for all this stuff to sort of stir up all this trouble. It's the small fringe sides of lots of these churches and lots of these communities. And
I think for a long time that little fringe was given space within the church, and sort of, scoffed at, like, oh, okay, we don't think that, but you do your thing as long as you do it on a Wednesday night. And then it slowly has been allowed to spread like that mustard seed. Like, if you don't come out and say, like, no, this isn't Jesus, this isn't the theology we believe in, it's allowed to fester and grow and spread, and then you have a January 6th insurrection.
And the thing that a lot of us in activism world, there's a couple of these little sayings that people really love that I do too, and I say them all the time. One of them is, when a social movement happens, it seemed impossible until it became inevitable, right? So if you feel like what we're calling for today is impossible, once it happens, you're going to look back and say it was inevitable, right? These are the chants for you. That works no matter what the issue is, right? A violent, hostile takeover of Christian nationalists of the Capitol seemed impossible until it became inevitable, right? Yeah. So the idea isn't that only the good ideas move with movement theory and sort of happen. And the other is this phrase: first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fear you, then they accept you. It's this sort of axiom inside of social movements. So if you're being ignored, hang on and just know the next thing that's coming is people are going to mock you. They're going to laugh at you and think that you're a fool. Then they're going to realize you're not a fool, and then they're going to fear you. And after they get done being all afraid of you, then ultimately they're going to accept you. Well, this is what some of us are afraid of is happening with this movement, right? People said, I'm not paying any attention to these voters and these people. And then we looked at them and kind of joked them off and laughed at them, whether they're in churches or in political worlds, and think that stuff is just so bizarre. Ha ha ha. Here's a funny meme. And then it's like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. This thing is infiltrating with, well, what's the next part of that stage? Acceptance of it. So at what point do you break that, cycle? Because with a lot of this Christian nationalism stuff, a lot of what's thrown into the jambalaya. What's the stuff you eat in New Orleans?
Jambalaya?
Jambalaya. Because jambalaya is like a stew where you put lots of things in. The jambalaya that is QAnon, it just takes all the conspiracy theories and just throws them all together into one big pot and lets them all stir up and sort of, soak in each other's juices, one might say. Well, that
juice
stuff. That Q Juice. Oh my gosh. Q Juice copyright 2021. Doug Pagitt and Deitrich. Anybody tries to use it, we're gonna pull this out. Somebody call our lawyers and get a copyright on that. All the Q juice that this stuff is resting in, that's what this is where the fear is, right? That you say like, and this is what people say, when they're more sophisticated on MSNBC or CNN or these places, they'll say like, hey, we can't allow this to become normalized. Well, there's a process actually by which normalization happens, and it tends to be ignore, laugh, fear, accept. So don't laugh at this stuff. Don't ignore it. Mm-hmm. Now, I also sound like all those people that, run around like with some kind of a fundamentalist attitude. Like we have to stop every single iteration, every time someone says anything that, because you can't allow this to even be spoken. Well, yeah, we can't do that either. There's a real balancing act, but in your own family, in churches, online, in grocery stores, with neighbors, just keep this stuff going so that it's seen as horrific. And maybe this is back to an hour, I have 45 minutes ago, me complaining about TSA and their toothpaste. Maybe this is why they keep the signs up that say never forget, and they're like, we're just not going to let people hijacking our airplanes become normative, and we're going to keep the pressure on all the time, which is why we need this January 6th commission that was going to be bipartisan between the Senate and the House. And the Senate said no. So then they take it just over to the House, and all but two Republicans, one Adam Kinzinger and the other Cheney. What's her first name? Thank you, Liz Cheney. I just had her dad in my head. Liz Cheney, because I was going to think about Don Rumsfeld, which we're going to get to in a minute. But Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are the only two, by the way, who both voted for Donald Trump in 2020. So let's not let that slide by, right? Yeah. Like, sure, they turned hard against him after the election, but before that, they thought he'd be better as president than Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. I mean, these two, honestly.
You don't get credit for doing the bare minimum to support democracy.
Well, now, I mean, I wish I hadn't voted for him now. But the run up wasn't enough. So anyway, it still makes my head spin. But they at least voted to impeach him, and they at least voted to move on to be for this commission that's going to take a look at what happened on January 6th. Because unlike the Senate minority leader and the others in the House of Representatives, some people don't think we know everything there is to know about this quite yet, that there's still a lot to tell. And I don't know if you watched the 40-minute video piece that the New York Times put out, but they've put out now footage all captured on that day into a 40-minute piece. And I've only watched part of it, and I just couldn't bring myself to watch it. It's so horrific. So I got to get my situation right where I can watch something like that so much. So it's so finally there's going to be a panel, and the Republicans will talk about it the way Democrats talked about the Benghazi panel, right? It'll be arduous, and it'll be fought over all the time, but at least the power of the federal government will be brought to bear on finding out what happened in subpoenas and some of all the rest of it. And look, again, as you said, Dan, if you have to argue about the insurrection and democracy, and people who are now trying to say they weren't trying to stop democracy, you either have to buy the lie that they were into, which was, we don't think we're stopping democracy. We think we're stopping someone who's trying to harm democracy, right? So to the true believer on January 6th, what they were being told was democracy was stolen, and people are about to validate that stealing. We have to stop that validation of the stealing. Other people are like, no, you're trying to steal it. Like this is the fundamental argument. So you could be with two people, both of whom are saying, I love democracy, and that's why I view this the way I do, and they view it exactly opposite. So that's a conversation one needs to have, right? Because the one side can say the side that says, no, the election was fair and the certification of the electors to elect Joe Biden is what the American people voted and wanted. That's provable. The other is not provable. In fact, it's definitively unproven.
Right.
So, yeah, but don't just say to yourself, oh, these people are running up there because they're screaming, I hate democracy. Like, that doesn't get you anywhere. Like, to impugn the motives of people who are doing this, there's something more dangerous than they hate democracy. That they love democracy and they think the way you love it is to hurt it. This is like being in a relationship with an abuser who doesn't know the difference between hurting you and helping you, between loving you and harming you. That's what we're dealing with these arguments. So this isn't they don't know how to love democracy. It doesn't help us to say that. It's what you're doing is not loving democracy. And then having that conversation. So I think you have to grant the position that someone holds when they hold it, and then get into how it is not actually doing the thing that you think you're doing.
I don't think you're doing the thing you think you're doing. Yeah.
We think about all the ways, that we harm ourselves individually or families and relationships. So we know how to self-harm as human beings. In fact, I contend that we're the only animal on the planet that self-harms, or at least does it on a regular basis and builds industries around self-harm. So we know how to self-harm. We know how to do things that work against our own interests, and we know how to do things that seem counter to the very thing we say we want to do. That's what's being on display here. Is that it's not that people are saying I hate democracy. We should stop saying Republicans hate democracy. We should say Republicans don't know how to love democracy. I think that's a better way. Like, you want to, your spirit is willing, your flesh is weak. This kind of stuff. Like, let me show you how to love, right? It's they need the kind of therapy that you do when someone's getting over self-harm or harming others. That's the kind of work that we need to do around this democracy. And it's kind of flying on both sides. All this voting stuff is going on. Basically, Republicans are saying too many people are voting. Voting is too easy. We need to put voting restrictions in because that's how you love democracy. You keep it safe. You keep it locked up. And like, what are we in some Disney story about how the king loves his princess daughter, so he locks her up inside of a castle? Like, don't you know that if it's true love, then you let it go, and if it's love, it returns to you. Some say love, like that. Now I'm going to sing the Rose, but if I did, I would be so on pitch. We'd probably get called up for one of those musical violations. So I won't go off and sing it unless we get blocked from people's feeds. What's happening here is that Republicans actually believe the way you protect and love democracy is to make it more difficult for people to vote, or the way they might say it, to not make it as easy for people to vote who shouldn't be voting, right? That's the logic. And again, iron manning someone or steel manning someone's argument as opposed to what's the other phrase?
Straw man?
Straw man. Thank you. Straw man, like setting up a straw man. Here's what you believe, and it's horrible, and then you tear it down. No, you build up the other argument as strong as it possibly can. Steel gird that thing. Make the argument better than the person who holds it would ever have thought they could articulate it. And then go after the argument. Because when you're going after the weakest part of someone's argument, no one's motivated by it. You always go after the strongest part. Yeah. So what Democrats are trying to say to Republicans is, hey, your view of protecting democracy by making it harder for people to vote is not a good way to protect democracy. The better way to protect democracy is to make it more open. Because people who want to put all these voting restrictions in, try to stop democracy, are saying to people like us, you don't love democracy because you don't even want to protect it. You just let people just run all over it and do whatever they want, and there's no protections, and people don't even have to show an ID to vote. Like, they're saying, like, you're the one that doesn't love it. If we would both agree, okay, I think you begin with the idea that you love democracy. And this is hard for some people to get to. They can't even get to the point where they believe that somebody else's intention is a good one. Once they get to the point where you say, yeah, okay, you say you want the best. This isn't the best.
Right.
right? Like you say you want this child to, is a metaphor, you want this child to grow up to be healthy. And yet what you're feeding the child is actually calorie deficient, harmful, rotting their teeth. So, because you love your child, let's think about this diet for a little child as opposed to this other diet. Because you love your child,
Right.
not you must hate your child because look at what you're doing. That's not how people are motivated. Republicans who are supporting all this limitation and the same stuff on the border because they want to protect the country. They just have it so fundamentally wrong about how you go about doing this. And what's maddening, Dan, to me about this is what Republicans say about every other issue. If you love the economy, let it run free. If you love America, reduce restrictions. Then on some issues, abortion, voting, the border, they just switch sides. More walls, more restrictions, more limitations.
Yeah.
So this is what makes people start to think, I think you're running fast and loose with, the thing. But look, we all do this all the time. We switch sides very nimbly. It's one of the things the human brain is quite capable of, right? Sometimes mid-sentence people can do this very thing. If you diagram the sentence, you see it. So what we need to do in all this stuff around the insurrection is, attacking the Capitol, that was really, really bad. There's no part of that's how you love democracy. It's like someone abusing a loved one and saying, well, I'm just showing how much I love them. That is not how you do it. And getting to the root of why do you believe that was the way to demonstrate your commitment to and your care for and your love of, man, that's what we have to get to.
I think that's true, but I think many politicians or people in power are using the average person's love of democracy, love of country, patriotism, and weaponizing that for nefarious reasons. So there's no pro-democracy justification for making it illegal to give someone water in a voting line. Like that's you can't mistake that for anything other than it is. But they sneak it in alongside the we want to protect from voter fraud play, and that works for a lot of people. Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure the people that can legally vote do vote, and so it's sort of, yeah.
Okay. So let me play the other side of this. There's people who would say, there's no way you could say you love democracy and yet you want someone to walk up and vote without showing any identification of who they are, just having a friend standing next to them saying, I validate this person. So this argument of voter ID, right? Like, how can you love democracy when there's no rational reason why someone can't bring a basic form of identification with something that identifies them? So why do you want, like taking the extreme of water within 100 feet, which is totally ridiculous. And I will again choose to violate that if I have the chance anywhere. There are people who make that argument like, look, you can give people water 150 feet. You can give them water 200 feet. They can walk their water bottle up. We're just saying you can't approach anyone within 100 feet for any purpose, even giving them water. You just have to do that 200 feet back, not 100 feet, right? Now, I'm not supporting that argument, but that's the argument. Just like you say, well, there actually are a lot of reasons why someone doesn't have an ID and they need to have something else that a person can do to overcome the fact that they lost their ID. You don't know how many people lose their IDs or have an expired ID. Like that is they might have one driver's license and if it's expired, they can't use it. So no, I'm not saying just let randos come up and cycle through and like, here's my buddy, ha, 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 let's go ahead and vote. That's not why it's in place. That's the accusation made about people who don't want voter ID, but that's not what it's about. So I don't know. I think there is a way in which even the laws that people are putting in place, we shouldn't just write all of them off as if there's no validation. I think what we need to argue is that's not a reasonable restriction. right? Like
Yeah.
that's not a good one. You know, like nobody wants people voting 20 minutes after the polls close, right? And none of us call that a voting restriction. That after 8 p.m. or 7 p.m., wherever you are, on voting day, if you haven't voted ahead of time, you don't get to vote after the fact, because no one is suggesting that voting after the fact is an unreason not being able to vote after the fact is an unreasonable burden. So we've all agreed, okay, there's some things you can't do. You
Mm-hmm.
can't vote after a certain date and time. Then you start walking back all these kinds of rules. I think we need to listen to all of them and really push on what is it that we think we're actually protecting here with any of the adjustments or laws that we want to put in place. Like, why do you think limiting the number of drop boxes is a good idea? Shouldn't we have more drop boxes?
Right.
Well, people are going to add things in there and they're going to put, like, no, we have other ways around that, right? Like, I get that that's what that's what your fear is. Because see, here's this is my basic point. When you're dealing inside of anxiety and fear, which we all experience, for many of us, our anxieties and fears, they're not based in the part of our thinking that is rational. In fact, when we
Sure.
stop and sort of breathe and think and engage something else, then we say, like, okay, hang on a minute, I'm going to be okay here. This is not
Right. When
I'm
we're
having an
afraid, we
emotion.
access our lizard brain, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm having an emotional response. So how does somebody get to the point where they approach this differently? Well, sometimes it's facts and information, but taking seriously the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking to someone yesterday who spends a lot of time doing long-term, like kind of like polling, but data, interviews with people who are self-identified Trump voters. And she does long phone calls with them. And finally got to it for this one woman in the South who said, I hear about taking down all these monuments and all of this. And I'm just afraid that someday that means they're just going to also take away my family's legacy. Now, when you talk it through with this person, my friend said she doesn't really think her family's going to be erased, but that's what it's tapping into. Maybe our family's just going to be ignored and disappeared. Now, in this country, we don't tend to think like that, but lots of places, families do just disappear. Like, people are just captured. They're called the disappeared. Like, go to Guatemala. That's part of the reason people are trying to get out of the country, because that's a fear that's not irrational there. It's very rational. But in this country, you're like, no, that's not going to happen. No one's going to come and move your family off your street the way they're moving out a monument. And she's like, well, the monument seems more permanent than me. If the monument can go, what about me? Okay, now let's talk about that, right? But to basically say, well, you're operating in fear, and people shouldn't operate in fear. Well, that'd be great. God, wouldn't we all love to not operate out of fear? Like every person I know. Remember, we were on the tour, we'd say faith over fear, and people are
The Proud Boys would shout us down.
yeah, and they would say the same thing, like, you're trying to drum up fear, and so yeah, wouldn't it be great if we all didn't operate in fear? But because we all do, then the way to approach this is with more significance, with more legitimacy. Not saying every argument is equal and the same, but to each person, an argument is powerful because it's powerful to them. This is what I've learned in my adulting, is it kind of doesn't matter what the power of the argument is in the abstract. It's what's the power of the argument in a person. And that's the thing that we have to get to for all of us. And that's kind of a basic empathic understanding, right? Not the arguments you hold are equal, but the power they play in your life are equal, right? And for all of us, that's totally and completely repeating, a process, I think, for all of us.
Yeah.
So, all right, boy, how'd we get off on that? That was fun. Hey, it's Thursday, July 1st. To all of you from Somalia, happy Independence Day. To the Deitrich family, happy Dan Day. And to the rest of us, just happy good old Thursday. And we'll be back tomorrow with the astrophysicist Paul Wallace, where we talk a little science here on the podcast. So thanks for being with us. Share these widely, share these broadly. Tell friends, family, frenemies, everyone that you listen, and maybe they will too. And happy birthday, Dan. We'll see you all tomorrow.
We'll see y'all.